Welcome everyone. I'm indeed going to talk about Rome away from Rome. But first I just want to give some thanks for some research funding. Firstly to the Rodney T. Pryder Award for my research in Italy, Jordan and Israel, which we'll take a look at. And also to the Australian Archaeological Institute of Athens for my research in Greece. Although this is the Roman Archaeology group, I present today not as a classicist, but as a researcher of the evolution of ancient urban forms in general. My doctorate is an extension of many years of research into the evolution of an Andean urban planning tradition, and now investigates the comparative possibilities between Roman and Incan use and forms of urbanism during their imperial periods. Since I'm acutely aware that the South American side of this research holds little validity for the focus of this group, and John previously warned me not to mention Incas at classics lectures, I'm going to leave aside that aspect of my research. However, please note that the Incans are an equal partner in my research, as its comparative nature affects the way in which the Roman data is analysed. More importantly, it is necessary to consider that cross-cultural analysis seeks a broader interplay of themes within a mass of data. In that, by comparing the two largest urban empires of antiquity, I'm looking for general cultural behavioural traits and philosophical movements that are formed by the dynamics at play between specific urban sites, cities and towns within each of the civilizations. My examples today are drawn from my recent fieldwork. So let us look at the broad sweep of the urban brush as it has painted the Roman Empire over the centuries to AD 324, when the capital was moved to Constantinople. A quick note here is that I will be using the term colony in the modern sense of the word, rather than the complex meaning of the word as it was used to designate the political standing of a city during the Roman Empire. The title of today's lecture, Rome Away from Rome, was chosen not just because it has a catchy humour, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to put it to good use, but because one of the fundamental questions raised by the comparative nature of my research is, what were the Romans trying to achieve with their focus on the formation of urban areas? Let me just conquer this. Right. No. That must be volume. No. Which one? Oh, I see up here. Okay. That was the hard part. The reasoning behind Roman attention to the urban needs and forms of their civilization began during the mid-Republican period. The settlement of the capital Rome around 750 BC and its urban growth through time is a complex story unto itself. However, what is important to keep in mind is that Rome grew organically over time, that is, without a clear plan at the beginning. Even with later considered alteration, it at no time represents the best of Roman urban planning. In its earlier stages, Roman culture was influenced by Etruscan and Greek ideas of urban construction and town planning. These cultures themselves were part of a long chain of ideas that formed a regional Mediterranean urban planning tradition that reached back eastward through ancient Greece and Asia Minor, back even to the spring of early Mesopotamia. When the Romans began their expansion into the Italian peninsula, they conquered the neighbouring cities of the Greeks, Etruscans, Oscans, and others. The success of conquest forced them to begin a long intellectual journey in which they were required by circumstances to develop a means to quickly and easily create new urban centres and to alter pre-existing urban spaces for their cultural needs. That is, they needed to form an urban plan, a plan which could be widely applied. The capturing of new territory was always a great and celebrated achievement for the Romans. However, the consolidation of their territories required a long-term Roman presence that was inclusive of the economic needs of both Romans and subjugated peoples. Holding on to annexed territory in the long term without a constant drain on military forces could only be achieved by the consolidation of that territory through the creation of Roman colonies. Following military conquest, the creation of colonies served as both administrative administrative centres for the collection of goods and taxes, but also as cultural centres to showcase the advantages of Roman rule. Through their physical design, colonies acted as places for the dissemination of Roman culture, ideology and technology, the dissemination of which usually led to the process of partial acculturation of conquered cultures. The acculturation process, these are some beautiful mosaics from the National Archaeological Museum in Spain that are very minutely made, amazing technology. The acculturation process, which was not an official policy, chiefly spread socially through local elite power structures, which continued to serve Rome's purposes and were as important as the continued threat of armed force for the maintenance of Roman control. The point of which was for economic gain rather than the annihilation of the prior indigenous peoples, their cultural expression, history, or religious beliefs. In areas where cities had long been established, either by indigenous locals or by foreign colonisation, particularly in the east, the occupation of existing cities required a peaceful means of coercion into the conquered subjects' acceptance of their new status under Roman rule. The conversion of their physical urban space through urban redevelopment to Roman planning ideals was a fundamental part of the coercion methodology. To live amongst Romanized urban space was to be consistently influenced by Roman ideology on a personal, physical, and day-to-day level. Roman colonies in which citizens and retired veterans were settled brought other advantageous Roman changes, such as permanent roads, agricultural technology, and infrastructure in the form of ports, bridges, canals, fortifications, as you can see here at Cosa, which is one of the first colonies, and new building materials. The delivery of these changes to any area, previously urbanised or not, required that an easily repeatable and quickly applicable urban plan was a key requirement of Roman expansion. As the empire grew under the imperial impetus, pushed by the first emperor Augustus, this urban plan needed to be applied to a variety of geographical locations, from mountains and deserts to the coastlines of the Mediterranean and Black Seas and the Atlantic Ocean. A planning aspect of considerable importance was location. Although flat geography was preferred, it was not necessary. As you can see, Cosa is built on a mountain top. Urban sites were chosen in accordance with the needs of ease of defence, access to water, and location along principal road routes were weighed up against the tactical needs of the empire. State requirements outweighed the needs of local populations. The famous Roman roads were fundamental in the consolidation of areas, leading the way to settlement prior to the construction of towns. They were the arteries of the urban system, which serviced towns, but so too towns service roads in a symbiotic relationship. The main intercity road should be thought of as an extension of the urban space, which served both a mobile population and the urban market economy. Roads overlaid the countryside with built geometry in a similar symbolic manner as urban growth. Apart from urbanism acting as a political and social tool in the Roman armoury for imperial advancement, it was also important that their urban design not only made the Roman citizen settlers comfortable to the lifestyle to which they were accustomed, but also that the physical layout and appearance of the urban space proclaimed the grandeur of Roman heritage and represented the physical manifestation of the Roman philosophy of order, organisation, and control, while maintaining the nature of their traditions and political cultural hierarchy. Early colonies of the Republic, such as Cosa, Paestum, which you see here, and Pompeii, demonstrate the formation of Roman planning scheme in that they show the structured street layout, Cardo and Decumanus main streets, related to the central forum, baths, basilica, wall defences, and other aspects which would become synonymous with Roman occupation. An urban plan that would be strenuously applied and further developed throughout the imperial expansion, which declines by 4th century AD. And here you can see This is the old Greek temple here with the Temple of Hera, number C, and this is where the Roman Forum is built into the future. You can see the grid plan already at work here from pre-Roman times. In the cases of Paestum and Pompeii, the pre-existing designs of the Greek colonies had to be negotiated to include the new Roman areas and needs, an aspect of Roman planning that was to be repeated throughout their conquest of the eastern provinces. Note that most of the original settlement areas remain largely untouched, while the new Roman growth attaches alongside, with the Forum usurping the role of the Agora as a clear political statement. Perhaps Athens is the clearest example of this, where not only is the new nearby Forum built, but the imposing Hadrians Library, built near the Agora, but the imposing Hadrians Library resembles the imperial fora at Rome. And that's a beautiful sunset photo. I couldn't resist it. But you can, here you can see the Hadrian's Library, which is built close to the Roman Forum and Agora here. Underneath, I'm going to come to this later, underneath the Acropolis, forming a new Roman centre, overtaking really what was the Greek centre. The creation of entirely new cities and towns was an aspect of urban planning that was needed throughout the empire. As the empire consolidated annexed territory, urban infill was required of areas with long urban histories, as well as areas yet to be influenced, particularly in the west, most of which, apart from the coastal area of the Iberian Peninsula, were existing at proto-urban levels. This is Tamagudi, which is the example of Roman planning at its simplest, really. It's often quoted as being the best example of Roman planning, but really it's probably the best example of its Roman planning in its most simple form. It is in the creation of the entirely new towns and cities that the Roman urban planning can be most easily recognised, as much today as it was instinctively then. On entering a Roman town, anybody knew what to expect and where it was most likely located. The Forum, located in a central position, could be found by following the Cardo, which goes normally from north to south along here, and the Decumanus go east to west, roughly. It's never always the same. Market, baths and elite housing would be close by, and the entertainment district and theatre would be easily found on one of the main streets. There would be little need for a visitor to wander in the small back streets unless on express purpose. This feat in itself created a homogeny of lifestyle that was cohesive across cultures and epochs. This is an idealistic impression of a Roman camp, so it's got all the factors in there laid out as it should be. The standard layout of the Roman town is conjectured to have been based upon the Roman fort, and indeed many towns grew from the existence of the Roman fort, changing over time from a military installation into the public domain as the frontiers swept forward, leaving in their wake the growth of urban centres necessary for administration and tax collection. The military presence in cities was usually enough to stimulate local markets to such a degree that urban needs became paramount, either within the confines of the Roman fortifications or without, where local indigenous or Vichy towns often took root. This is Colchester, and you can see here, this is the old Roman fort defences, which were then filled in when the town expanded out further as it grew in size. Whether this is true, certainly Roman forts were quickly and easily constructed by armies on the move, precisely because they used a standardised design that was easily repeatable with the local materials at hand. It is these points that are crucial in the creation of the Roman urban plan. The Romans created an urban toolkit that could be applied under any circumstances needed, and which was also easily adaptable from the fort layout, as they shared many of the fundamental basics of design. The Roman toolkit consisted of an orthogonal street layout based on the rectangular centuriation division of the blocks, where streets met at right-angled crossroads in an orthogonal style grid layout. A central forum dissected by the main thoroughfares of the Cardo and the Decumanus Maximus, a basilica located in the forum, and shops and taverns beside the surrounding streets, baths and often a theatre or amphitheatre. Elite dwellings were usually centrally located. You can read in more detail up there while I go on. Depending on the size of the urban centre, its importance and the amount of imperial or citizen investment, it may also have an aqueduct, drains, hydraulic system, racing track, odium, gymnasium, marketplace, and multiples of these infrastructure. Some cities had 2 fora. Not all aspects of the toolkit needed to be present to be considered Roman in design, but would have some or most, as these were added over time. Pausanias considered it necessary to have a substantial number to be considered a city, no matter the official designation. The orthogonal layout, which could not be strictly applied in all types of geography, was adapted when needed to the available space. Walls were often built first to take advantage of the natural defensiveness of the terrain, and the interior laid out inside, aligning to the gates but with negotiable shape. Roman roads were fundamental to the spread and maintenance of urbanization of the empire, and which linked village to town to city into a vast intercity interprovincial network. The main road passed through the centre of the cities and towns, more often than not through the forum itself, where if wheeled traffic was permitted to enter, it was clearly demarcated as it passed across the forum. Essentially, all the cities were linked to Rome, and it was to Rome that the citizens looked for inspiration and direction. This is an important point to note. Rome was the inspiration from which urban designers of the empire sought to emulate, to make a Rome away from Rome. However, Rome was not laid out in this orthogonal structured manner. Instead, the urban planning toolkit essentially expressed what was considered desirable in Rome, this being the general essence of Roman urban life: the forums, baths, theatres, temples, aqueducts, fortifications, circus, amphitheatre, and markets, and more. The development of new cities and towns allowed for all that to be included and located in an orderly manner, a manner which not only suited the Roman temperament, but allowed the great number of people travelling within the empire to always have access to Roman culture through Roman space. That is, it created a culture of inclusivity that meant that although a person may never visit Rome, they nonetheless felt Roman within Roman space. Roman cities were to the individual and family a home, to the economy a market, to the state a tool, to the empire the consolidation that allowed the peace of the Pax Romana. If there are 2 things for which Romans are still remembered by all today, it is military might and cities, and the Romans brought them in that order. Both were fundamental to the Roman imperial identity. Roman urban space was a great source of Roman civic pride. When Augustus came to power in 27 BC, and following the colonization lead set by Julius Caesar, who no doubt had Alexander the Great in spirit, he realized the importance of urban expansion for the creation of Pax Romana, a peace which would stabilize a new empire in civil turmoil. Roman urbanism had been spreading, acting as a political tool in the consolidation of territory in the ex-Parthian lands of North Africa, Sicily, and Iberia, but also in the east, in Greece, Anatolia, the Levant, Syria, and Egypt, while many new urban centres have been created in the occupation of Gaul. The focus on new urban creation in the Augustan period continued under the following emperors into the 2nd century AD, notably Hadrian and Trajan. Wallace Hadriel makes the point about Rome's leading architect, and I quote, "The issue of identity is so fundamental to Vitruvius that one could characterize his project as the rebuilding of Roman identity through architecture." Born of his respect for Hellenistic culture, one of the most important achievements of Augustus was his understanding of the importance of monumentality for the creation of a grandeur to Roman architecture that would be competitive with the great feats of urban design and architecture in the provinces of the East. Imperial Rome could not afford to be eclipsed by the opulence and grandeur of the East. As part of the politics of dominance, the visual and architectural dominance of Rome needed to be asserted, and it was his famous quote that he found Rome a city of bricks, but left her a city of marble, that perhaps best expresses this understanding. This is a recreated drawing, which I absolutely love, his work, Ericsson. Rome, as the capital, needed to have a suitable grandeur to suit her status. The Ptolemaic capital of the East, Alexandria in Egypt, was tough competition in urban grandeur. I consider that one of the main aspects of the Eastern culture's effects upon Roman urban design, was that it forced the Romans' competitive nature to respond in the form of an increased awareness of and investment in monumental and grandiose architecture and infrastructure. It pushed already existing Roman civic pride to new levels of investment and attainment. Roman towns, whether newly founded or redeveloped, sought investment in their urban infrastructure through the addition of baths, temples, theatres, and other aspects of the toolkit. The greater the investment, either by a town's citizens or by capturing the interest of the emperor himself, led to a greater reputation, which brought increased economic advantages and political possibilities of influence in Rome. This is the Augusta Emerita, which I recently went to in Spain. It's the Temple of Diana. I chose the night shot for obvious reasons. And they have a wonderful theatre there that I think is an equal of Ephesus in terms of what's left standing. Those towns with the increased infrastructure that were able to supply an ambience and experience reminiscent of that available in the capital Rome were those whose reputations and visitation were greatly increased. All roads may not lead to Rome, but they certainly led to a town or city where some of the experiences that Rome offered could be enjoyed. However, some cities were sought after for experiences that Rome could not offer, such as Diocletian Nautilus of Thrace in present-day Bulgaria, famous for medicinal thermal baths which drew people, even emperors from Rome and the rest of the empire. Unfortunately, I couldn't come out with any good photos from Diocletian Nautilus because all that's really left standing to see of great value is the walls itself. But the healing baths continue to function to this day under modern buildings. What the Roman Empire had to offer was a collective urban experience coming from the many variable experiences of a large urban system. It should be noted, however, that the mere collection of desirable infrastructure was not enough to make a city's reputation, as baths, aqueducts, fortified walls, theatres, amphitheatres, temples, and the like were reasonably common in the imperial age. Cities were constantly not only adding new public buildings to their repertoire, but were also doing redevelopment and the constant maintenance and repairs that cities with long histories must endure. Rome herself, like other cities, suffered from the constant threat and calamity of fire, while in the eastern provinces, earthquakes occurred with a relative frequency. You'll note here for later that there's two fora in Augusta Emerita. One is the colonial, and that's the imperial. The creation of new edifices, redevelopment of urban space, or the maintenance of deteriorating infrastructure was a cost often borne by leading citizens or freedmen. Sometimes the emperor could be persuaded to bankroll the work. Athens, for instance, was gifted multiple buildings. Redevelopment was a chance to inscribe the city with a history of its leading figures in stone, literally. With buildings, aqueducts, and even roads, sponsors' names carved into them. It was also an opportunity to increase the city's reputation through the eloquence of design or the opulence of the materials used. That's Hadrian's. Where are we? That's Hadrian's Arch there, and it's the Oval Plaza at Jerash, which I'm sure many people here have seen anyway. The Roman use of brick and concrete throughout the empire is widely known. Their use of local products and indigenous labour accustomed to those products was also common practice. In Britain, stone was scarcely used in many of the Roman towns, and marble was seen as a luxury reserved mainly for state buildings in Roman administrative centres or provincial capitals. But in Britain, as in Gaul, Dacia and northern Spain, where previously hill tribes had lived in wicker and mud dwellings, and who continued to use those materials under Roman rule, fewer stone structures and ornate buildings were needed to impress the power of Rome upon the indigenous leaders and populace. As you would have seen on the plan of Colchester, there was a lot less infrastructure than, say, Augusta and Merita. However, Roman technique in building is renowned for its use of marble in facades and public works of art, along with bronze and other precious materials. Marble became synonymous with Roman construction, state authority and elite status. In the East, where urban design had an opulent past and monumental design was already widely used before Roman occupation, a great deal more investment in the size of buildings and quality of material used was needed to represent the superiority of Rome. That many well-sited towns already existed meant that in most cases Rome had to redevelop already existing urban areas. Often the central focus of the town had to be resited from a raised Acropolis location to a new forum, which would be the centre of the new Roman urbanisation. The Acropolis would need to have a Roman temple of a size to dominate the prior structures, and the new Roman area also needed to have structures which would not be dominated by pre-existing buildings. If necessary, buildings would be removed, but in general, the Romans respected the traditional religious and commercial structures as part of the maintenance of social and economic systems of the local elite, which served the taxation and acculturation purposes of Rome. In smaller towns, little more than a Roman veneer was adequate. Letting the local ways and local urban design continue made economic sense. Now here, this is Scythopolis. And here, go back to that one, you can see the Acropolis here in the background, which originally held an Egyptian palace and buildings. And down here, that's the Acropolis there. And down here, the Romans build their centre with the Roman Forum. Baths are actually over here, the theatre. And this is the Decumanus coming through here. You'll note that it's not completely on the north-south. Sorry, that's the Cardo, and this is Decumanus Maximus. There's actually a bridge down here which probably led to more outside city indigenous housing on this side. This is probably the best completest ruin in Israel, which I saw about 30 years ago when it was little more than a few stones sticking out of the grass. So to come back now, and they just started excavating then, and to find them excavated to this level was really quite a shock. I thought I'd come to the wrong place, actually. I had to ask about 3 times. So here you can see this is the Decumanus Maximus, where it crosses with the Cardo here, and this is the Forum there, the Forum being here, and this is the Cardo coming through. This is a view off the top of the Acropolis, flowing round through. Baths are over here, market and theatre there. So it really is an amazing site. If you're ever in Israel, it's an absolute must-do. The public decoration of Rome boasted of by Augustus seems to be mirrored in the monumental marbled and colonnaded edifices of provincial capitals and other important cities throughout the empire. The striving through architectural design and size to represent the dominant power of the empire also mimics the same motions made by the capital Rome itself. The civic pride with which successive emperors invested the capital Rome was also invested in the other cities of importance, both Roman created and redeveloped, such as Antioch, Pergamum, Alexandria, and Ephesus. This is a model of Athens during the Roman period. I like it because it gives a nice idea of the sort of grandeur that Rome's competing with the grandeur of the Greeks up on the Acropolis. Perhaps Athens is the best example of a city of little economic worth to Rome, but which, due to the cultural respect with which it was held, was invested with monumental structures in an attempt through Romanization to be culturally associated with the capital of the Hellenistic culture. The destruction of Athens was unthinkable by the emperors who held Hellenistic culture in acclaim. The physical architectural domination of Athens was also an expression of the Roman domination of the Hellenistic world. Beyond the need for Rome to compete with the grandeur of the East, a second effect that the East had upon Roman planning was a fusion with Old Eastern and Hellenistic ideas to bring about the comprehensive cohesion of a city, based around the Eastern notions of the sacred way and axiality and the Roman toolkit of public infrastructure. This is Lepsis Magna. That's Tetrapylon, sorry, wrong button, Tetrapylon there, which we'll be talking about a bit further. That is actually located here at A, and you'll see here in the next slide that this is the Severan Forum with the colonnaded streeting. Also this is the old part of Lepsis Magna, and this is the new part that was constructed later. As cities grew in size and complexity, it is important to understand that the limitations of urban space, particularly within fortified cities, required new public buildings such as baths and markets, and especially large ones like circus and amphitheatres, even villas, to often be constructed on the margins of the urban areas or outside of the city walls. The availability of land became a deciding factor. Cities became spotted with infrastructure, and it could seem that there was little relationship between them and connection to the traditional central forum. Now, to fit it on, it's on the side. Oh, wrong button again, hang on. But this is Lepsis Magna, there's the Severan Forum, and this is the colonnaded street which goes along with it. Severus came from Lepsis Magna, so in a way, this is where this kind of design springs from, and he takes it to Rome and throughout the empire has it applied. That's the port in front of the colonnaded street. Lepsis Magna, a provincial capital on the north coast of Africa, shows the disharmony of design that could occur when a new city extension was built beside the original, where the two forms of centuriation stand at an angle to each other, caused by the geography of the site. This general lack of design unity between the infrastructural elements was due to the increasingly growing size and sophistication of cities in the empire. This disunity of planning was eventually resolved over time by the slow evolution of the Roman toolkit to include two new elements that we today come to unconsciously consider to be a hallmark of Roman urban planning. However, it was the mixture of the driving power of civic pride and the cultural fusion of indigenous ideas from Syria and Egypt, and perhaps the East in general, that evolved the Roman urban plan into today's recognised form. Two ideas which took the discordant nature of the dotted infrastructure, which at best formed micro blocks of commercial, religious or entertainment areas surrounding the forum, temples and baths and theatres, were formed into a cohesive plan that became the functioning city of the urban heyday of the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Here's Pompeii, and you can see here that you're getting your shops and your bakeries all along these main thoroughfares, not so much in the back streets. So the people coming into Pompeii knew exactly where to find things. Here you've got an entertainment area with there's two theatres down there, and also over here with the amphitheatre, the forum is in here. I'm going to show you a slide coming up of a bakery in the streets, which is on this little corner here, which is the older Greek section. This is the Roman section. You could probably make that out by the orthogonal ground plan, which was added later after the Greek and Oscan period. And you can see how the streets here are not fitting to that typical Roman grid system. The Romans had to compete not just with opulence and monumentality in the East, but also a sense of cohesion of Eastern cities, which had a long history of being axially centred on the sacred processional way which led through the city to the great temples standing above at the heart of their Acropolis. This main thoroughfare of the city was the central cultural and economic focus. This is Qais in Jordan. You see the central cardo there, and there's still quite a few pillars standing. There happened to be an event on that day in which a bunch of walkers, a lot from Australia and New Zealand, had walked the length of Jordan, and as part of their kind of music and celebration, they had a whole bunch of very hot-tied Roman soldiers sitting around under the pillars. But I like to think that just a few of them got left behind and didn't realise that the empire had disappeared. Perhaps in both a response to this, but also in the adoption of Eastern ideas, a new extension to the Roman urban design began to develop and then spread from Antioch in Syria in the 2nd century AD, and which over the course of a century developed in two ways. The first is the physical design of the colonnaded street, which provided an important focus on the Cardo and Decumanus Maximus, which is where they were principally to be found. The design of the colonnaded street, now synonymous with Roman towns, grew from the east and spread throughout the empire. Eventually it became of great importance in Rome itself, where the colonnaded porticos had already played such a large architectural role in both public and private space, and had served as the harbinger of the colonnaded street. The second change, this is Hippos in Israel, built on a mountaintop, part of one of the trading cities in the Decapolis, and you can just see the Sea of Galilee there in the background. It's quite an amazing place. It's still a military outpost for the Israeli, so you have to go through a landmine to get there. So it's not quite so visited as other places. As you can see, I had it to myself the entire day, actually. The second change that was to tie the colonnaded street into the new era of Roman urban planning began in the Severan period, 193 to 211 AD, and is associated with his North African providence. What has been termed the armature design was a design movement which saw the colonnaded street linked together and highlight the important infrastructure of the Roman cities, so that rather than the sensation of them being scattered into different quarters of the city, rather that the city design acted as a whole upon people as they moved along colonnaded streets between locations of importance. There's a lot of these columns lying around in rows like that, which is really wonderful to see. The armature also served to highlight the unity of the city by the clever use of urban vistas, which put the finer parts of the city on display. For example, the clever use of tetrapylons, the internal four-way gates that we've seen. At angled intersections on the Cardo, it stitched together areas where the grid streets were out of kilter, so that older and newer parts of the city flowed together. Landmarks were created by which people could navigate. But this was no instant process, and I quote MacDonald's work. Armatures were not created consciously and all at once within the controlling requirements of comprehensive city plans, nor were they conceived of from their beginnings as entities in themselves. Instead, they evolved over time through gradual elaboration and quite often extension. We're back to Jerash here, and that's the North Tetrapylon, which is located here. Now, there's actually, doesn't really show up on the plan, there is actually a bit of a angle off at the Tetrapylon there, and its job is to tie that angling off to the north gate in with the rest. There's another Tetrapylon located here, the south Tetrapylon, and the Hadrians Arch, which you saw, is down here. And you can see that the circus is outside of the city walls, while the theatres are just inside on a hill slope here. This new cohesion could be applied to existing towns and cities and was eagerly adopted in the competitive climate of civic pride. With this new design feature, even eastern urban spaces that were so monumental in nature that previously they easily eclipsed Roman introduced elements could now be Romanized, and local buildings brought into harmony with the introduced Roman infrastructure. Roman Alexandria, with its colonnaded causeway, is a good example. Severan armature design would bring about changes throughout the empire, including Rome. In terms of cities that were built with a plan of direct emulation of Rome, of course, Constantinople comes to mind as the first prior city of Byzantium was redeveloped with the infrastructure in mind that the new capital of the Eastern Empire would need. A further, perhaps lesser known example for me is Augusta Emerita, which we've seen today, which was founded by Augustus to be a new capital of the Iberian Peninsula, and which included from the outset imperial infrastructure, some of which grew to standards equal to that of Rome, housing a large circus, theatre, amphitheatre, colonial and imperial fora, river port, 1 kilometre long bridge, 2 aqueducts, fortifications and impressive basilica, also villas and other decorative features. This has been a brief overview of Roman urban utility. The conclusion that I'm coming to is that apart from the use of urban centres by the Romans as a political, economic and military tool for the consolidation of the empire, it was also a response which facilitated the other needs of acculturation and the supply of cultural comfort through public infrastructure to Roman citizens and subjugated peoples. Further, that the initial Roman urban design toolkit was gradually extended and developed through the play of the cultural force of the already urbanised East. That civic pride played a large role both locally and imperially as a motivating force in that development. Competition with Eastern culture and between Roman towns drove a civic pride which was a creative force in the continued development of a Roman urban design. Roman urban planning was not a static set of elements, but was evolving individually in various towns under the relationship between recognisable Roman elements deployed in various combinations. Also, that the dynamic of civic pride and the continued development of Roman urban traits was as much a part of the urban lifestyle of the capital Rome as it was in the cities and towns all over the empire. Each town was, in its own way, to be a representation of the grandeur of Rome. Each urban node, city or town, in which Roman urban elements had been invested, stood as a cultural representation of the capital Rome herself. The Roman aspects of each town were the draw card for both Roman and as yet un-Romanized peoples, which linked them all into an urban network connected by the immense road system. So that, in a very real sense, culturally and experientially, all roads did lead to Rome. On a final note, most of these plans have come from this wonderful new book, Cities of the Classical World, which I discovered in Foyles on a recent trip to London. These city plans have been made extremely useful by Colin Everdy because he made them all to the same scale, making them uniquely comparable, which I've not seen in any other book, not to mention the easy reference material in each city that is attached. The other book is a new book by Rob Burns, Origins of the Colonnaded Streets in the Cities of the East. He recently lectured here, and it's a fascinating read on urban development in the East. Thank you.